Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Old Man Aben, and the purpose of my channel is to help high schoolers and young adults navigate their complicated world by giving them a different perspective. Perspective of someone my age looking back at the same choices that I made when I was your age and what I learned in the process of both my successes and my failures. Today I'm going to be continuing with part 5 of my life story and how I got here. I know it's been a ride, and I appreciate you coming along with me. I hope it's interesting enough for you to continue listening to this story. Well, Mom showed up, dropped a bomb, and just like that, my 6-year-old world was turned upside down again. Even though I'd only been with Aunt Pauline and Uncle John for what I'm guessing to be about a year and a half, I had already started to put down some roots there. I had bloomed where I was planted, and I thought of being, that it was going to always last forever, that was going to be the way it was. So being torn out of that was terrifying. It's funny how kids pick up on things. Even though I was not used to being taken care of, and even though in the past, being able to come and go as I pleased, I hadn't really known what I was missing. I recognized safety and consistency when I saw it, and once I experienced it, I craved it. I wanted it. I needed it. And so I revolted against the decision to move away from what had become my home. Aunt Pauline, she didn't want me to go. She tried to reason with Mom on my behalf, but it was no use. Aunt Pauline told Mom that she would love me and keep me and raise me, and she would never have to worry about me again, but Mom wasn't having it. I begged Mom to let me stay with them, but she refused. And once again, I was yanked out of the place that I loved into a world of chaos. Except now, it was with a man that I had never met mixed in. I found out years later that Mom and Aunt Pauline had always had kind of a tricky relationship. Pauline was the responsible one, the one who worked hard and did what was needed to be done to be successful. Mom was the wild child. She was always partying and running away and getting into trouble and expecting everyone else to bail her out. Pauline tried to help Mom many times through the years, even as they became adults. And even though Mom often accepted her help, in the end, Mom would resent her for her success as a wife and a mother, and she would revolt against her advice and her love. There was no way in heck Mom was going to give her son to her sister to raise, because that would show, once again, that Mom was a failure as a mother, and she would never give her sister that kind of moral high ground and the satisfaction of saying that she was better. And so what I believe is just purely out of pride and stubbornness, I was taken away again. There were a lot of tears when we left Boston. I was crying, Aunt Pauline was crying, my cousins were crying, and I knew that I would never see any of them again. But years later in my 20s, I did reconnect with them. But that's a story for a different time. I remember that we drove all the way from Boston to Wisconsin in a red 1964 Ford Galaxy with all of our worldly possessions in a U-Haul trailer. My sister, that I had never met, me, Mom, and her new husband, Al. Al had absolutely no use for me, which I can understand, I guess, seeing as how I was another man's kid that he had to be responsible for. Al was mean pretty much to everyone, but he was even meaner when he got drunk, and he was even meaner to me. And Al was drunk most of the time. I remember that he had a big tattoo of a ship's anchor on his forearm, just like Popeye. And I made the mistake of calling him Popeye once, and he smacked me so hard that I was lifted off my feet and landed on my back on the floor. I never did that again. I have never known who my real father is. I always wanted to know. I always had questions. And I asked Mom about it several times. But her response was she didn't know. And I don't know if she really didn't know or if she just didn't want to tell me. But in any case, to this day, I'm 65 years old, and I still don't have any idea who my father is. Not knowing who your dad is really does something to your mind. It makes you feel that somehow, especially as a kid, you aren't a valid person. It makes you imagine all kinds of reasons that he wouldn't want to be a part of your life. And it makes you blame yourself because somehow it has to be your fault. Many years later, after I was married and in my 20s, when I reconnected with my Aunt Pauline and her family, she told me that she had a suspicion of who my father was. She said she couldn't prove it, but that she thought that her first husband, the one before Uncle John, had cheated on her with her sister, my mom, and gotten my mom pregnant. She said that during that time, Mom was living with her. And suddenly, with no explanation, Mom just took off one day and didn't see Pauline for a couple years. And when she finally showed up again, she had a baby, me, with her. Now, in those days, there were no DNA tests available, so all she had were her suspicions. And that's one of the reasons she fought so hard to keep me when Mom told me that we were moving to Wisconsin, because she always thought that I was her first husband's son, her children's half-brother. But she didn't dare say it out loud. And there was no way to prove it. Now, by the time that Aunt Pauline and I reconnected in my 20s, and Aunt Pauline told me her suspicions, her first husband had passed away. So I couldn't go and ask him. I couldn't do a DNA test because there were no DNA tests when I was a kid. Paternity tests was no longer possible. I've thought of maybe doing a test with one of Aunt Pauline's kids to see if we have the same father, but I really don't want to open that can of worms because I don't want to screw up their world, and I don't want to make them have to make some of those hard choices and have that kind of stress. My desire to know about my father seems kind of pointless now anyway. If it was Aunt Pauline's first husband and the timing does point to him being that guy, well, he's gone anyway. I loved Aunt Pauline, and I told her so many times, and she kept her secret until she died some years later of cancer. Yeah, life is funny. Not ha 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 funny sometimes, but weird funny. California, I had mentioned earlier that it was like a different country when I moved away from Boston. But Wisconsin was like a different planet. There were forests and trees everywhere, and miles and miles and miles of hayfields and cornfields. We passed dozens of lakes and rivers and herds of black and white cows standing and watched us drive by. Beautiful huge green lush fields. And when we got to Wisconsin, we moved into a place that was more like a cabin in the woods than a house that I was used to. It was about a mile down the road from Al's mom and dad, his parents. The cabin was yellow. It had white trim. I remember that. It was totally surrounded by trees. It was completely in the forest. And had a hand-operated water pump in the front yard. We did have running water in the cabin, but there was a hand pump in the front yard where you could pump your own water like you see in Little House on the Prairie or that kind of a movie. And that was cool, and I used that pump a lot. The cabin had 3 rooms. It had a kitchen. You walked into the house, you walked into the kitchen. So you had a kitchen and a dining room table on that end of the house. Then you walked into the middle room of the house, and as you can probably figure out, it was the living room, but it was also the bedroom with a pull-out couch, which meant only one thing. Yep, you guessed it. I was sleeping in the bathroom again. Now, this bathroom didn't have a tub. It had a shower, but it was much bigger than the bathroom of the apartment that Mom and I had back in Boston. So Al built me, and I know this sounds strange, Al built me a shelf on the wall, kind of like a small bunk bed for a little kid. And I slept in there on that shelf in the bathroom in a sleeping bag. That was my life. Right back to that same situation that I had in Boston. So when I'm sleeping in bed, people are coming in using the bathroom, and there I am right there. Al's parents, their name were Willard and Ilona, and they lived up the road from the cabin. And we spent a lot of time there. Mom couldn't cook at all. So we ate a lot of suppers with Willard and Ilona. And since Grandpa Willard owned his own logging business and Al worked with him several days a week, we ate a lot of breakfast there too. Most days we had breakfast, and then I would either hang around there or go down. It was walking distance back home to the cabin, and I would hang around there or play in the woods. But there were no kids around where we lived, out in the middle of the country, out in the middle of nowhere. So I spent my days exploring the woods, hanging out with Grandma Ilona while Willard and Al were at work, or going to walk. Sometimes I would go to work with Grandpa Willard, and he was a logger, so I would ride in the logging truck and hang out with him. And even though I was not their blood relation, they accepted me as theirs from the very first day and told me to call them Grandma and Grandpa. This is emotional for me. I will always be grateful for the gift that they gave me. And even though it was often difficult and came with its own set of problems, not just for me, but for them as well, I'm sure, they accepted me and loved me, and my sister, and my mom. But they didn't get along very much with my mom. Things do happen in our life for a reason, I know that. But like I said, a lot of times the reason is because of the choices that we make that put us in a situation or put us in a place where we didn't expect to be. But even in the midst of those random things that happen to us, we can find joy. We can find love. We can find peace. We can't guarantee that tomorrow we won't get a disease that kills us, or be on a plane going to Disneyland that crashes. But it could be just as true or just as possible that the greatest thing that's ever happened to us in the world is going to happen tomorrow or today. I don't want you to live a life of fear and foreboding. I want you to live a life of hope and realize that your choices and your decisions in the midst of what's happening to you create a world and create a life that can be awesome. You don't have to be a victim of your life. You can win and be successful in the midst of struggle. Well, that's all for today. Hit the like button if you liked this video, if it was helpful, touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel and leave me some comments. I'd love to hear your comments on if you have questions or things that you would like me to talk about or at least give you my point of a view on. Let me know. Have a great day, friends. We'll see you in the next one.